My name is Karen Hughes, and I am the Domestic Violence Clinical Services Coordinator for the Life Crisis Center. And I want to welcome you to Life Crisis Today. We have had some trying times lately, and I know that a lot of people are starting to suffer with some mental health issues. And they're reacting to things and being triggered by things, and that's leading to their mental health issues. So we're going to be talking about trauma triggers today. And with me is Michelle Gerlitzki, our Outreach Coordinator. Hello, Michelle.
Hello.
It is a rough time right now for some folks, and people are getting triggered. And when we talk about that, we talk about trauma, we talk about triggers. There are some big words, well, they're small words, but they're big concepts. Let's define those two words, trauma and triggers. Let's start with trauma. What is trauma?
Okay, so the trauma that we're going to talk about today is specific to the types of trauma that we address at Life Crisis Center, such as sexual assault, domestic violence, human trafficking, child abuse, those sorts of things. So the definition that we use is deeply distressing events, something that's a very disturbing experience that causes a high level of emotional concern.
Right.
Or an emotional shock, basically, is what we define trauma with.
Okay. And trigger. I know that when I've talked to clients who are not from the United States, that doesn't always transfer into a definition, and I have to explain it to folks. And I even think folks who are from America, they don't understand what triggers are either. What is a trigger? When we say that, you and I say that word all the time. People are triggered.
Yes.
What does that mean?
A trigger in our work that we help address is something that is a stimulus to a traumatic event that occurred. So it's basically a psychological memory. It is something that causes someone to have a psychological memory of a traumatic event. You know, it could be defined in different ways, even in our realm of work. It doesn't have to be something that is frightening or traumatic at the time of the trigger. It is, like I said, it's a physical memory that kind of puts that person back mentally to a time that was traumatic to them.
So it brings up their memory, but then also they react emotionally to it.
They do.
Yeah.
They do.
So I know that our bodies can be affected, and it's, even our brains.
Yes.
Let's talk about the brain, because the brain has reactions, and we don't know why we act the way we do, but it can actually be in our brains as to why we're reacting. Can you describe that?
Well, first of all, I'd like to share a little bit about how trauma affects children in relation to triggers. So for a lot of experiences in life, trauma is different for each child. And one similar traumatic event, a child could react differently than another child next to them.
Right.
So I think it's important to realize that there are different responses to trauma for children specifically. And I like to talk about children and brain development because, you know, there's a lot of child development steps, and trauma affects children sometimes a little differently than adults because children are still developing. Their brains are still developing. Their bodies are still developing. So it's important to know that trauma in children's lives physically affects their brains. It can physically change their brains. I think it's important, though, to express throughout this program that trauma effects to the brain can be healed during childhood and throughout life for adults as well. I think it's important for folks to know that trauma affects the physical development of children because the brain is our main source of everything in our body. You know, so I think it's important for people to know that. Now with adults, I think that it's important for people to recognize, like I said earlier, that even if the brain is traumatized and physically altered, it can be healed as an adult as well.
So even if they were, the event was happening as a child, they might still react as an adult.
Definitely.
Or an event happens as an adult, it'll affect them then too.
Yes, because our brain has what's called our amygdala. So it's a fear center in our brain. That's the easier way to say it, because I can usually not pronounce it. But I like people to know about the fear center part of the brain. When trauma affects the brain or a trauma occurs, that fear center takes over. It takes over our thinking center of our brain. And so, things can happen where we just go ahead and immediately react.
Right.
And sometimes it's not in a positive way. And that's what we'll get into about triggers.
Okay. What is the next step for the triggers?
Well, first I'd like to back up a little bit if I could.
Sure.
There is going to be you'll see an image on the screen of a healthy brain on the left and a brain that was traumatized on the right. And you're going to notice that the brain on the left has some colors, reds, oranges, greens, and that's where the brain has activity happening properly. The image on the right is going to have more black images within that image of the brain. And the black is showing a traumatized area of the brain that has physically altered and is inactive or nearly inactive due to trauma.
So the messages can't get from one part of the brain to the other then.
Right.
Yeah. I kind of like to think of the brain where we have the two sides, and the thinking brain and the feeling brain, and then that message can't get to the other, from one side to the other. Like a bridge has either blown up or has a big roadblock in it or something like that.
Exactly.
Yeah. So when we get triggered, some things that can trigger us can be any of our five senses.
Yes.
Do you want to describe how the senses can play a part in the triggers?
Well, I think it's important for folks to know that when they are triggered, that there's kind of a stress hormone that works in the body, and that causes that instant response, which sometimes will cause emotional problems or behavioral problems in children and adults, because that fear part of the brain is taking over, and like I said, the thinking part is not taking over, and so they're not able to address that trigger the way they might want to because of how the brain tries to protect us. And so it's actually kind of like exercising. You have to practice these trigger releases regularly to be able to redevelop that black portion of the brain that's inactive and not working in conjunction with our thinking part of the brain. Does that answer your question?
So the message can get from one, so that message eventually, if you keep practicing it, will go from one side to the other again.
It will.
Rather than just getting stuck in reaction.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. But there are a lot of examples of triggers for people, for example, through their senses. For example, smell. Some folks have come to us in treatment and shared about a cologne. The person maybe who assaulted them was wearing a certain cologne, and if they are no longer being traumatized, in real life, in reality, but might be at the mall and they smell that cologne and they're triggered. Their trauma is triggered again because of that sense of smell that takes them back to that moment. Or, for example, if there's a domestic violence situation where an intimate partner uses gunshot as threats in the home or around the home as a fear tactic, and that other partner gets out of that situation, and maybe they're driving down the road one day and another car next to them backfires, and it takes them back. That trigger takes them back to their trauma because they had guns in their past life. And so those are kind of some examples of triggers and different ways our senses will take us back to that.
I know some of my clients also talk about tone of voice. Even if you rate just a little bit louder, not even angry, just louder, can be immediately putting them, oh my gosh, I got to brace myself because this is going to go bad. It could be a song. It could be the certain types of music. It could be any kind, when we're doing the hearing part, yeah. It could be certain foods. I mean, there's all the five senses can trigger people.
It can. It could be, there's some instances for some college kids who are, maybe having a drink, and there's a lot of date rape scenarios, and, if they are a survivor of that and later down the road in their future they taste something that tastes similar to that drink that they know was associated with that incident, that could bring them back to that sort of trauma through a trigger.
And even little ones, they may not have the words to describe it, but all of a sudden they always react in a certain way when something happens, and their parent can't figure that out. And it's really because it's really deep in their brain, because that part of the brain is the really deep part. It's kind of like our base, where we react and also protect ourselves.
Right.
Yeah. So we do protect ourselves. We do cope, and sometimes it's healthy and sometimes it's not healthy.
Right.
That's in life in general. We do healthy things and unhealthy things. But with coping with being triggered, let's talk about the unhealthy first.
Okay. Well, a lot of common unhealthy ways that we've seen folks cope with trauma and trauma triggers are substance abuse. Just a way to try to escape, a way to try to numb, or choosing reckless behaviors just to try to distract themselves, like unhealthy sexual behaviors or risky driving behaviors. Isolation, isolating themselves because they just don't know what to do.
Right.
They don't know how they're going to react to other people, when they're out and about, because they might get triggered.
Right.
But really what they're doing when they isolate themselves is not learning other ways or using their support networks to manage the triggers and to be able to be healthy again and not seeking treatment.
Yeah. You can get stuck in the unhealthy.
Right.
And that just perpetuates itself too.
Right, and feel like you can't get out of it.
Right.
So you need some other folks to help pull you out.
Yeah. Let's talk about the healthy.
Okay.
I like to be more positive. What are some good things people can do for healthy things to cope with when triggered?
Well, I think it's important to notice fight, flight, or freeze, which is also associated with the brain and trauma. And, recognizing that if you are triggered, that could look like becoming angry out of the blue and not knowing why.
Right.
That could be a trigger. And that's like that fight that your brain is trying to process. Flight might be where you're at a place or a restaurant where an assault started, and you are back at that same similar restaurant or a restaurant that looks like that, and you're in that flight mode where you want to just leave because you're triggered by something you see in there that reminds you of the assault. But I think part of being healthy in your triggers is recognizing that is not the current situation. Being present in the moment, being mindful of, okay, I feel like this, but this is not my reality right now. That happened in the past. Deep breaths, getting yourself grounded in the present situation that is not a trauma.
Yeah. I also like to do things of, where are my feet? I can feel the feet on the floor. Where I'm sitting in a chair, I can feel the chair. What do I see? I'm using the five senses in a way as a healthy thing.
Exactly.
Rather than, oh my gosh, I'm getting triggered by these senses. No. Where am I now? Being very, like you said, I love the word present. You're very, very present with where you are right now.
Exactly. Very important.
Yeah. Anything else with mindfulness?
Just making sure that you're learning through your mindfulness what self-care is. Mindfulness is a part of self-care, but there's a lot of different creative ways to care for yourself. And being mindful is one of them, but making sure that you, like I said earlier, use a support network, whether that's family, friends, your spirituality, having somebody to kind of keep you in check and keep you grounded when you can't do it on your own.
Right.
Seeking therapy. There's great cognitive behavioral type therapy that can help people get grounded and get in that reality current mindset.
Right.
Medical checks, regular medical checks. Making sure you do that annually at least to make sure that you're getting insight into your current situation.
Right. And you know your body then.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. Exercise and nutrition. I mean, nutrition, it really does help a lot with clearing your mind, decreasing anxiety, lifting you up holistically. So I think those are some ways that you could really, deter that triggering from happening, or if it does happen, you can really get yourself back to the reality of the present.
Okay. So we've been giving a lot of tips here. How about helping children and helping them cope? Because they're not aware, like they're still learning who they are, what their bodies are. Can you help kids?
Okay. So regarding trauma and triggers is what you're asking,
right.
Well, I think it's it correlates with regular childhood development, really, because children need consistency, routines, structure to be able to grow and know, and to be able to trust and feel comfortable and make decisions. So part of helping children who have experienced trauma to decrease triggers and negative reactions is making sure their environment feels safe and is safe, like real basic. So making sure they know that it's safe.
Right.
So minimizing fighting, minimizing elevated voices, for example. Creating a safety plan with them, a written safety plan that they can be a part of developing, that they can see whenever they might feel like they might get triggered or they're feeling a little anxiety. Increasing support and reassurance from caregivers. That's part of what I said earlier about routines and consistency, and if you know what's going to happen next, to share that with them.
Right.
We don't always know.
Yeah.
But you can deal with that when you come to that bridge with them. And if you have consistency and routines in their lives, they can handle those bumps in the road better.
Right, right.
Just making sure that you can teach them, if they get in a situation where they might get triggered, doing that mindfulness with them that not every person that yells is angry.
Right.
For example.
Right.
Somebody might yell because they're excited.
Right.
And letting that child recognize the difference between maybe a domestic violence situation they were in versus, oh, that person's just really excited because something good happened.
Right, right. Or I also know kids will say, "You're yelling at me." I was like, "No, I'm just telling you you need to take care of something." But that can trigger them because they think they're being yelled at when it was more of just giving them very direct directions.
Right.
And so you have to be aware of a child's reaction when that happens. Yeah.
So what you're saying is, if you say something in a certain tone, even though you're not yelling, they could be triggered by that.
Yes.
So, and that's another good point too, like recognizing as a caregiver that they may react to a tone of voice like it is a yelling situation. Right. We need to be able to adjust ourselves for kids to not be triggered too. Right. So I do think it goes both ways. So that's a good point. And finding them a therapist if that's something that they feel like they're ready for. There's all kinds of creative child therapy these days that can help folks, get through trauma triggers that they've experienced as children and overcome them and feel very successful and proud.
Yeah, yeah. And then they can live their life without having to be triggered, or if a situation reminds them, they know how to handle it.
Exactly.
They've got those skills.
They're not carrying it through their adulthood as much with as much severity.
Right, right.
Yeah.
Resources in the community. Let's do the local ones.
Okay. There's the Personal Wellness Center, which is in Salisbury.
Okay.
And their number is 410-742-6016. There's a real fun place in West Ocean City called Ocean Elements Salt Spa and Float Center. A great experience if you've never done it. 443-664-2265 is their phone number. And then there's a Healing Arts Center of the Eastern Shore in Berlin that has all sorts of different holistic health healing resources all in one building. It's sort of like a co-op. They don't list their phone number, but they do have a website because they have different vendors in that building. So you go to the website to access each of those. And that website is www.eshealingartscenter.com.
Yeah. I know that they have a lot of different vendors in there, and they're very helpful in lots of different ways,
They have yoga, meditation, just very creative classes. You can do a yoga class on the beach. So yeah, all three of them have various resources of wellness.
And I also recommend the salt float. That's very, very relaxing. And I'm not familiar with the other one, the Wellness Center, but I'm gathering that they have a lot of resources for people as well.
They have counseling and different sort of mental health resources that can help folks with trauma and triggers. Okay.
But we also have the Life Crisis Center. That's what we do. If folks just need more referrals for other agencies, we do have a hotline. And I'll give that number in a few minutes, but we also do counseling. Like you said, we do trauma therapy. We have a number of therapists on staff to help for children and adults when there's been a trauma. And we also have other programs if they need things like for the legal for a protective order, or if they need a visitation center. We have other resources there too. So there's lots of things that if people need to have help with things, they can seek it out.
And I do outreach, so if folks need some outreach materials or want a discussion about different types of trauma and how to address it, I'm available for outreach as well.
Great. Well, Michelle, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you.
And I want to thank you for joining us. We do have a hotline. The Life Crisis Center is 410-749-HELP. So the number is 410-749-4357. So if you're a person who doesn't like to chat but needs to talk to somebody and you like to text, we do text to chat, and that number is 898-211. You do have to put in your zip code to make sure that you're getting the correct 211 system. We have through the hotline, you can reach us and get into the counseling program and our legal program. We have a website, www.lifecrisiscenter.org. So, Facebook, Instagram, we're there. Reach out. There's lots of ways to get help. Thank you for joining us. And I also want to thank PAC 14 for allowing us the space to give this information to you. Thank you.